The skies above Tiran Fiv were burning. The planet had once been a jewel, a thriving hub of commerce, knowledge, and prosperity under the banner of the Unity Accord. For centuries, it had been a beacon, a testament to cooperation between species. Now it was nothing more than a smoldering wasteland. Ash fell from the sky, not as snow, but as death. Gray, choking, suffocating. Buildings that had once housed thriving markets and bustling streets were now nothing but skeletal remains. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning silicon, metal, and flesh. It tasted like despair. The cityscape was a ruin of crumpled structures and fractured streets. Orbital bombardments from Kravnal warships had shredded the planetary surface in waves of destruction. Each barrage was a deadly symphony. Explosions that sent tremors through the ground, crackling through the atmosphere and turning the sky into a canvas of fire. The once bright domes of the capital city were now hollowed-out husks, their transparent coverings shattered and warped by the heat of plasma cannons. The Kravnal fleet hovered ominously overhead, a vast collection of insectoid warships, their sleek exteriors reflecting the red glow of the planet below. Inside the remnants of the capital, chaos reigned. The people of Tiran Fiv, my people, ran for their lives, scrambling for shelter beneath whatever was left of the city's protective infrastructure. Their cries echoed through the ruins, carried by the wind that whispered through the skeletal remains of towering structures. The planet's defense systems had been obliterated hours earlier, leaving no hope of repelling the Kravnal's relentless assault. Our weapons were useless, our shields down, our forces scattered. In desperation, we reached out to the wider galaxy, our former allies in the Unity Accord, our old comrades in the Regari Coalition, even the mysterious Eldari who had promised us aid so many years ago, but the silence was deafening. No responses, no reinforcements, no promises of salvation. It was as if the universe had turned its back on us, leaving us to die alone in the dark, surrounded by enemies we could not defeat. The Kravnal did not spare us mercy. They did not negotiate. Their hive fleet descended like a swarm of locusts, overwhelming every last line of defense we had. The commanders of the Accord had long since turned their gaze away, their once strong promises dissolving into hollow words and abandoned ideals. The Kravnal took our cities, enslaved our people, and set their sights on the very heart of our civilization. We were no longer a threat. We were prey. I stood on the edge of a ruined plaza, watching as the last remnants of our resistance were crushed beneath the relentless might of the Kravnal warships. My heart was heavy, a weight of guilt and helplessness pressing down on me. We had failed. Tiran Fiv was lost. And as the bombardments continued, I wondered if there was even any point in continuing to fight. It was in that moment of despair, as I watched our world burn, that the sky above us tore open. At first, it was nothing more than a sonic boom, a crack that split the sky like thunder. It was so sudden, so intense, that for a moment, even the Kravnal hesitated. Their ships jerked back, their weapons temporarily silenced. The sound reverberated through the air, sending shockwaves across the planet. It was as if the very fabric of space had been ripped apart, leaving a void behind it, a void that was filled by something immense, something powerful. And then it appeared, slowly at first, a shape so vast that it seemed to eclipse the very stars above. It was a warship, but not like any I had ever seen. It wasn't just large. It was a predator, blacker than the void itself, with long, jagged edges and a hull adorned with streaks of crimson energy that pulsed with the intensity of a dying star. The ship was massive, far larger than any of the Kravnal's hive fleets, and its silhouette was unmistakable. It was not a vessel of mercy nor of diplomacy. This was a warship, a weapon forged for one purpose: destruction. The Kravnal recoiled as if they had felt something they had never anticipated. They turned their ships, erratically at first, as if uncertain of what they were seeing. Some of their smaller craft fired, sputtering blasts of energy that glanced off the approaching ship's shields like raindrops. But the human warship did not respond with overwhelming firepower. It didn't need to. Its mere presence was enough to instill panic. The Kravnal, the apex predators of this galaxy, were afraid. And when the Kravnal were afraid, you knew something beyond ordinary was happening. We watched in awe and terror as the warship descended, It didn't just land, it arrived, as if it had always belonged here, as if it had been waiting for this moment. We had no communication with the vessel. No transmissions came through. No signals. Just the eerie sound of its engines humming. Through the atmosphere, the deep vibrations shaking the ground beneath our feet. And then, through the smoke and chaos, we saw it. The nameplate UN's Phalanx. My heart stopped. The letters were burned into my mind, etched into my memory with an intensity that made everything else around me fade away. The nameplate was written in old Terran script, faded, scuffed, and scarred from years of battle. I had heard the name once before, in whispered legends among the older commanders. The Phalanx was a relic, an ancient warship abandoned long ago by the humans after they were exiled from the galaxy by the Unity Accord. The humans, the ones who had been deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable, had returned. But why? Why now? We had been abandoned, left to die by the very alliances we had once fought to uphold. For over a century, humanity had been cast out, their ships forbidden from entering the galactic core, their military ships decommissioned and erased from history. And yet, here they were, defying the galaxy's orders, defying the universe's expectations. Why? What could they want with us? Before I could contemplate it further, the answer came in the form of a new broadcast. One that was not sent by our commanders, but by those aboard the Phalanx. A voice, cold and devoid of emotion, spoke through every remaining frequency. Coordinates for evacuation have been uploaded. Move to the following points. Supplies will be dropped in 10-minute intervals. Do not resist the Kravnal forces. Assistance is on the way. The voice had no warmth, no hope, only a promise backed by overwhelming force. And as the humans' warships began to land, deploying their troops onto the broken surface of Tiran Phi, the Kravnal fleet hesitated. For the first time, they pulled back. It wasn't fear alone. It was calculation. Something had changed. The humans had arrived. And with them, a storm was coming. Shall I continue with Section 2? The arrival of the UNS Phalanx did not bring with it the immediate chaos we expected. Instead, there was an eerie silence, a stillness in the air that felt as if the entire galaxy had paused to witness what was unfolding. The Kravnal fleet, so relentless in their assault on Tyran 5, now hovered in an uncertain, almost hesitant formation. They hadn't retreated, but they no longer pressed their advantage. The strange human warship had done what no other force in the galaxy had ever been able to do. It had made the Kravnal stop. From the wreckage of the city, I watched in disbelief as the first human troops began to descend, their ships cutting through the smoke-filled sky like blades. Their descent was methodical, precision-built machines that dropped onto the broken streets with terrifying efficiency. Each craft, sleek and dark, landed with an eerie quiet, a soft thud that shook the ground beneath us. The human forces that emerged were unlike anything I had ever seen. These were not the ragtag survivors from some distant outpost. They were a well-oiled, highly trained force, a force forged in the crucible of war. As the first group of soldiers disembarked, I noticed their armor. It was not the typical shiny metallic plating that adorned the soldiers of the Unity Accord. No, this was different. Their armor was matte black, segmented with glowing blue lines that pulsed rhythmically, like the beating heart of the ship they had come from. Each soldier was armed with weapons I had never seen before. Sleek energy rifles, their barrels humming with power. Weapons designed to cut through the toughest of armor and most resilient of forces. The soldiers moved with purpose, their eyes hidden behind dark visors that reflected the destruction around them, calculating and cold. These were not men and women who had come to negotiate. They had come to win. And they were here for one reason: to take Tyran V back. The sight of their soldiers, their technology, and their presence was a shock to the system. For over a century, humanity had been absent from the galactic stage, exiled for their supposed recklessness and unpredictability. The Unity Accord had declared them too dangerous, too volatile to be trusted with the future of the galaxy. They had been cast aside, their legacy erased, their warships decommissioned, and their people scattered to the farthest reaches of the known universe. Now they had returned, not as allies, not as saviors, but as the harbingers of something new, something that made the galaxy tremble. As the soldiers advanced, they didn't pause to aid the wounded or gather the survivors. Instead, they moved quickly, methodically, sweeping through the ruins of the city. There was no hesitation in their actions. Every movement was practiced, deliberate, and deadly. It became clear that these humans were not just here to fight. They were here to take back what had been lost. They were here to remind the galaxy of who they were. Meanwhile, the Kravnal fleet had begun to regroup. It was a slow, awkward process, almost as if they were afraid of the human forces that had arrived. Their massive warships turned, their weapons primed, but they did not attack. They waited. It was an unsettling sight. The Kravnal were known for their ruthlessness, their single-mindedness in conquest. But this was different. They had never faced an opponent like the humans before. I watched as the human soldiers activated a strange device at their feet, a small triangular object that unfolded into a towering structure in mere seconds. It was a communication relay, but it was unlike any I had ever seen. The device shimmered with energy, its surface rippling with a strange, iridescent glow. The moment it activated, the Kravnal fleet responded. The warships altered their course, but this time, they were not retreating. No, they were positioning themselves, forming a perimeter around the human forces. Something was about to happen, something that none of us could predict. Then, without warning, the UNS Phalanx fired. The sound was like a crack of thunder, deep, reverberating, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. But the impact was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. A beam of light, so bright it was nearly blinding, shot from the Phalanx's hull, slicing through the sky with an unnatural precision. It wasn't just light. It was energy, concentrated and focused, a single bolt of pure destruction aimed directly at the largest Kravnal ship. The impact was instant. The Kravnal vessel didn't even have a chance to fire back. The energy beam hit the ship with such force that the entire ship seemed to ripple, as though the very fabric of its being was unraveling. The ship's shields flared brightly, trying to absorb the blast, but it was no use. The energy beam penetrated effortlessly, cutting through the ship's armor like a hot knife through butter. The vessel buckled, twisted, and exploded, sending a shockwave through the surrounding fleet, rocking their ships with the force of a planetary detonation. The Kravnal fleet was thrown into chaos. Smaller ships collided with one another, firing blindly into the chaos, their commanders scrambling to respond. But they were too late. The Phalanx had made its mark. Then, another human vessel, smaller, faster, darted through the fray. It was a scout ship, a sleek design painted with the same black and crimson scheme as the Phalanx, but it moved with the agility of a predator. It dropped in low, weaving between the debris of destroyed Kravnal ships, and unleashed a barrage of missiles. The missiles, unlike anything the Kravnal had ever encountered, tore through their ranks with surgical precision, each one finding its target and detonating with a pulse of deadly energy that shattered the Kravnal's remaining defenses. What was this technology? What were these humans? The Kravnal, once confident in their overwhelming superiority, were now in full retreat. Their once unshakable resolve faltered. The humans had not only arrived, they had shown the Kravnal what it meant to face a force that was unrelenting, precise, and unyielding. But it wasn't over yet. As the Kravnal fleet scattered, the ground forces of Tiran V were not left behind. The humans were not content to simply drive the invaders from orbit. They moved through the streets, liberating the survivors with terrifying efficiency. Each human soldier fought not just for victory, but for vengeance. For the centuries of exile, for the betrayal of their people, for the injustice of being forgotten. And in that moment, I realized something. Humanity had not returned as an ally, nor as a savior. They had come back as a force of reckoning, not just for Tyran V, but for the entire galaxy. As the days passed, Tyran V began to change. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the air, as if the planet itself was exhaling a sigh of relief. The Kravnal forces were retreating, broken and scattered, their once mighty fleet reduced to a fraction of its former power. But the human presence on the planet was undeniable. It was not just their ships in orbit, or the military personnel patrolling the shattered streets. It was their will, and it was unyielding. The human soldiers did not act like conquerors. They acted like people who had come to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. There was no grand celebration, no singing or speeches. Their actions spoke louder than any words ever could. They moved with precision, each step calculated, each decision made with a deep understanding of what was at stake. Every soldier, every officer, knew that this was not just a battle. It was the beginning of something much larger. This was the re-emergence of humanity on the galactic stage, and it would not be a quiet return. The Kravnal, despite their retreat, still held control over the central city of Tiran Firth. It was their stronghold, the heart of their invasion, and though their fleet had been shattered, their ground forces were still entrenched. They had not given up. They had simply regrouped, waiting for the right moment to strike back. But they were no longer fighting to conquer. Now, they were fighting for survival. The humans, however, were not concerned with survival. They were concerned with victory. In the days following the initial battle, the UNS Phalanx established a command center at the ruins of an ancient Tyranian fortress. From there, they coordinated the liberation of the planet, sending small, highly trained strike teams to infiltrate Kravnal positions and dismantle their infrastructure. The soldiers were ruthless, efficient. The Tyranian resistance, once fractured and desperate, now found themselves allies in a cause they had never imagined. They joined the humans not out of duty, but out of necessity. They had seen the might of the Phalanx firsthand, and they understood that humanity's return was no mere accident. It was fate. Meanwhile, aboard the Phalanx, the human command center was a hive of activity. I had the rare opportunity to witness this firsthand. The ship itself was a marvel of design, vast and imposing, its hull black and angular, like the sharp edge of a blade. The bridge was cold and sterile, every surface sleek and metallic, lit by the soft glow of holographic displays. Officers, their faces obscured by the same matte black armor the soldiers wore, moved quickly between stations, their movements swift and sure. They spoke in clipped military jargon, no wasted words, no distractions. But what struck me the most was not the ship's technology, nor the sheer efficiency of the crew. It was their leadership. The humans were led by someone known as Admiral Caney, a name I had heard whispered in fear and awe across the galaxy, but I had never fully understood its weight until now. Admiral Caney was no ordinary commander. He was a living legend, a tactician, whose every decision seemed to shape the course of history. His presence was palpable, his every move a calculated strike. He was cold, calculating, and yet there was something deeply human in his eyes. A fire, a determination. He was not just fighting for victory, he was fighting for a future. I had the chance to speak with him during an informal briefing. I remember his voice clearly, low and deliberate, as he explained their strategy. "We didn't come back to play games," he said. "We came back because we have unfinished business. The galaxy has forgotten us, but we are not weak. We are not the same people they cast aside. The Kravnal, the Unity Accord, the Council, they all thought we were gone. That was their mistake. Now we will show them what happens when they abandon humanity." His words were not boastful, but there was an undeniable sense of power in them. Admiral Caney had spoken as if he were the embodiment of humanity's return to the stars. A return not just for survival, but for the reclaiming of their rightful place in the galaxy. And I believed him. In the days that followed, the humans' tactics grew more aggressive. Their forces, now fully entrenched on Tiran Firth, began to launch systematic assaults on the Kravnal strongholds. They didn't attack indiscriminately. They were surgical, striking at critical infrastructure, communication, hubs, and supply depots with pinpoint accuracy. It was a relentless assault, and the Kravnal were beginning to crumble under the pressure. One particular strike, the assault on a Kravnal command center, stood out in my mind. The humans had infiltrated the heart of the city's defensive grid, slipping past enemy patrols with an ease that was almost supernatural. Their soldiers moved through the streets like shadows, blending in with the ruins, their weapons silent but deadly. And then, in a flash of movement, they were upon the Kravnal, dismantling their forces with terrifying efficiency. What followed was pure chaos. The Kravnal, caught off guard, scrambled to defend themselves. But the humans were unrelenting, their soldiers a blur of motion as they swept through the city. The sound of gunfire was constant, a steady rhythm that echoed through the streets, punctuated by the sharp crack of explosions. The Kravnal, once the aggressors, were now the ones fighting for their lives, their attempts to regroup stymied at every turn. And all the while, I couldn't help but watch in awe. These humans, these people who had been forgotten, exiled to the fringes of the galaxy, were now turning the tide. They weren't just fighting for a planet. They were fighting for something much larger. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, a place that had been denied to them for too long. As the battle raged on, I found myself asking, what would the galaxy do when the dust finally settled? What would they do when the humans had reclaimed their rightful position as the galactic power they had once been? The final days of the conflict on Tiran 5 were marked by an eerie stillness. The Kravnal forces, once a relentless and terrifying presence, were now on the brink of collapse. The human military, their strategy flawless and their resolve unbreakable, had pushed the invaders to their breaking point. What remained of the Kravnal fleet had retreated into deep space, their communications shattered and their command structure in complete disarray. On the ground, the last pockets of Kravnal resistance were dwindling, their soldiers scattered, disheartened, and out of options. But the humans did not relax. The UNS Phalanx was still orbiting the planet, its massive silhouette looming over the surface like a watchful guardian. Admiral Caney, ever the strategist, was preparing for the final push. He knew that victory was within reach, but he also knew that the Kravnal would not give up without a fight. There would be no mercy. No quarter. The last stage of the battle was to secure the remaining Kravnal stronghold, the citadel of Taznar. A towering fortress nestled in the heart of Tiran V's largest mountain range. The citadel had been the command center of the entire invasion. It was heavily fortified, with deep underground bunkers, automated defense systems, and thousands of Kravnal soldiers who had fought tooth and nail to protect it. But the humans were ready. They had prepared for this moment, training for months, refining their strategies, and ensuring that every soldier was equipped to handle whatever the Kravnal could throw at them. The night before the final assault, I stood on the observation deck of the Phalanx, staring out into the black void of space. The planet below was a mix of fire and smoke, the remnants of the conflict still burning brightly in the atmosphere. It was a haunting sight. So much destruction, so much loss, and yet I could not shake the feeling that it was all necessary. The Kravnal had come to conquer, to wipe out every trace of humanity from the galaxy. But they had underestimated one thing: the sheer will of a people who had been wronged. The humans had returned not just to fight for a planet, but to reclaim their destiny. As I pondered the enormity of what was unfolding, a soft voice behind me interrupted my thoughts. It was Admiral Caney. He had come to join me on the deck, his presence as commanding as ever. "You see that?" he asked, pointing to the planet below. "All of that. It's the price of forgetting humanity." I turned to face him, but his gaze remained fixed on the scene before us. He looked tired, like a man who had been carrying the weight of 1,000 battles for far too long. But there was something else in his eyes. A fire. A relentless drive that could not be extinguished. He had seen the worst of what the galaxy had to offer, and yet he stood tall, unshaken. "The Kravnal thought they could take everything from us," he continued. "They thought we were weak, that we would just fade away into obscurity. But they were wrong. We didn't come back for vengeance or for conquest. We came back to remind the galaxy who we are." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet determination. Humanity had been left to rot on the fringes of space, abandoned by the very galaxy that had once feared them. But now, with their fleet restored, with their resolve sharpened, they were showing the universe just how wrong it had been to underestimate them. The assault on the citadel began at dawn. The air was thick with tension as the human forces mobilized, preparing for what would be the final confrontation. The soldiers gathered in silence, their faces hard, their eyes steely with purpose. They had fought their way through the streets, the cities, and the mountains of Tiran 5, but this, the citadel, would be their greatest challenge yet. The final battle was nothing short of a spectacle. The human soldiers, equipped with the latest in advanced combat technology, stormed the gates of the citadel with unparalleled precision. Their weapons were sleek and deadly, energy-based rifles that could cut through solid metal with ease, armor that shifted and adapted to the environment, and grenades that unleashed concussive waves of force, leveling anything in their path. The Kravnal, despite their numbers, were ill-prepared for the human onslaught. They fought with desperation, but it was clear they were already defeated in spirit. Inside the citadel, the battle raged with ferocity. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning fuel. Explosions echoed through the corridors, the ground shaking with every blast. The humans fought like a well-oiled machine, each soldier moving with purpose, every step leading them closer to the heart of the citadel. Admiral Caney was there, leading the charge, his face grim as he commanded his troops with calculated precision. There was no time for hesitation, no room for error. Every move was a calculated risk, and every moment could mean the difference between victory and defeat. But Caney never wavered. His leadership was the anchor that held the human forces together, guiding them through the chaos with a steady hand. As the human soldiers pushed deeper into the citadel, they encountered the Kravnal's final line of defense, their elite soldiers, the Taznar Guard. These warriors were a fearsome sight, their armor thick and spiked, their weapons jagged and brutal. They were the last line of defense for the Kravnal, and they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. But even they could not stand against the human assault. The humans were faster, smarter, and more determined. One by one, the Taznar Guard fell, their armor pierced by the humans' advanced weaponry. It wasn't long before the last of the Kravnal forces inside the citadel were defeated. The human soldiers stood victorious, their weapons raised in triumph, the bloodied remains of their enemies scattered at their feet. But there was no celebration, no cheers. There was only the silent acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. The Kravnal had been defeated, and humanity had reclaimed its place in the galaxy. But as the dust settled and the wounded were tended to, there was a sobering realization. The battle on Tiran 5 was not the end. It was merely the beginning. The galaxy had seen what the humans were capable of, and they would not forget. There would be other battles, other challenges. But humanity had proven that it was no longer a forgotten race. They were back, and they were here to stay. The stars above Tiran Phi gleamed cold and distant, oblivious to the monumental change unfolding below. Yet, for the humans standing on the barren battlefield, the victory at the Citadel marked a profound moment, one that would ripple across the entire galaxy. Humanity had fought not only for survival, but for their very identity. The return of the human fleet, the UNS Phalanx leading the charge, was the culmination of centuries of isolation, hardship, and rebuilding. No longer would they be dismissed as forgotten, abandoned remnants. Now, the galaxy would know that the humans, once cast aside, had returned with a vengeance. Admiral Caney stood among his troops, gazing across the vast expanse of the Citadel's shattered walls. His face was weathered, a mixture of exhaustion and relief etched into his features. But there was a fire in his eyes that refused to be extinguished. He had seen countless battles, watched worlds burn, and watched his people fight against insurmountable odds. But this victory was different. This victory marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. An era where humanity was no longer at the mercy of galactic empires, but one where they stood as equals. No longer just a footnote in the universe's history, but as a force to be reckoned with. The soldiers were quietly disbanding, their faces solemn as they walked past the bodies of the fallen Kravnal, the last remnants of an empire that had underestimated the human spirit. The ground was littered with the wreckage of war, burned vehicles, crumpled armor, and broken weapons. But the humans didn't celebrate their victory. There was no drunken revelry, no loud cheers of triumph. Instead, there was a deep, contemplative silence, as if each soldier understood the weight of the victory. They had not only saved Tiran Phi, but they had sent a powerful message to the galaxy. The humans had returned to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. As Caney made his way back toward the command center, he was greeted by Captain Andromeda Rios, his second in command. She stood tall, her uniform bloodied and torn, but her eyes gleaming with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. She gave him a nod of approval, acknowledging their shared struggle. "It's done," Rios said softly. "We've won." Caney met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "It's not over yet. Not by a long shot." The truth of his words hung heavily in the air. Tyran V had been liberated, but there were still many questions left unanswered. The Kravnal were not the only threat in the galaxy. Their invasion had been the beginning of something far larger, a signal to all that the galaxy was shifting. Other species, other factions, would now be watching humanity with keen interest. The question that haunted Caney's thoughts was not whether humanity could win, but whether they could maintain this newfound place in the galactic hierarchy. The Kravnal had been brutal, but they were only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Caney knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril. There would be more battles, more enemies, and countless challenges that lay beyond the horizon. But humanity was no longer the underdog. The Phalanx, its technological marvels, and its stalwart crew, had proven that with enough resolve and determination, the human spirit could overcome even the most formidable foes. Later that night, as the sky above Tyran Phi began to settle into a tranquil, star-strewn canvas, Caney found himself standing alone at the edge of the battlefield. The firelight flickered in the distance, illuminating the faces of the soldiers who were preparing to leave. The Phalanx would soon depart, and with it, the last vestiges of the long, bloody conflict would fade into the annals of history. But something stirred within Caney. A quiet resolve, a deeper understanding of what their actions had truly set into motion. His thoughts were interrupted when Rios approached, this time holding a small metallic object in her hand. A Kravnal insignia, one that had been recovered from the body of the last commander they had faced inside the Citadel. The insignia was a symbol of the Kravnal military, a harsh and jagged emblem that represented their brutal, unforgiving nature. Rios handed it to Caney, who took it without a word. "The last of their kind," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of respect and finality. Caney turned the insignia over in his hand, examining the sharp lines and the dark, menacing design. It was a relic of an enemy defeated, but it was also a reminder of how far they had come. From the ashes of their past, humanity had risen, not just to survive, but to thrive. "This isn't just a symbol of victory," Caney said, his voice steady. "It's a reminder. We're no longer the hunted. We're the hunters now, and..." With that, Caney knew. This was just the beginning. In the coming days, the Phalanx would set course for the stars, leaving Tyran Phi behind. But the battle for humanity's place in the galaxy was far from over. The Kravnal were defeated, but countless unknowns still awaited. With the human fleet now known across the galaxy, with their technology and their newfound allies, species, who had once feared them now offering tentative support, a new chapter of history was being written. The message humanity had sent to the galaxy was clear. No longer would they remain on the fringe. No longer would they be forgotten. The Kravnal's empire was only a stepping stone, and humanity's true potential was yet to be revealed. There would be new challenges, new enemies, and new alliances. But humanity would face them all. The UNS Phalanx had returned, and with it, a new era was dawning, for the galaxy had learned one crucial truth. Everyone had abandoned humanity, but now, no one could afford to ignore them. The future, uncertain and filled with endless possibilities, was humanity's to shape, and they would not stop until their place in the cosmos was firmly secured. This time, the galaxy would remember humanity's name.